Somewhere right now, someone is standing at an altar about to marry a person they've known for 3 years, 4 years, maybe 7. They'd tell you they know exactly who they're marrying. They don't. And before you place yourself outside of that, think about the person you trust most right now. Maybe you're dating them. Maybe you're engaged. Maybe you've already said, "I do." You'd probably say you know them. Not perfectly, nobody's perfect, but well enough. Well enough to build a life around. Well enough, you'd think, to call them anything but a stranger. Here's what we get wrong from the start. We think closeness and knowledge are the same thing. They're not. You can feel closer to someone every single day, more comfortable, more familiar, more at ease, and still be learning almost nothing new about who they actually are. Comfort has a way of feeling like insight. It isn't. What you've actually been collecting isn't knowledge of them, it's evidence that things have gone well so far under the conditions you've happened to share. And so far is doing a lot of quiet work in that sentence. Think about the person you're with, or about to marry. However close you are, there was a beginning, a first few months where you were meeting for the first time, learning each other, showing each other who you were. And I know what you're thinking, you've heard this part before. Everyone's on their best behavior at first. You assume you accounted for that months ago, once the guard came down. Here's what that assumption misses. The performance doesn't end when the guard comes down. It just gets quieter. Neither of you was lying, but neither of you was fully there either. You were both leaving out the version of yourselves that's tired, defensive, hard to be around. Not to deceive, just because that's what people do when they know they're being watched, even by someone they love. Psychologists call this impression management, the near automatic habit of shaping how we come across to people whose opinion still matters to us. And comfort doesn't turn it off. Comfort is exactly what convinces you the editing has stopped. A few years of the edited version doesn't become the uncut one just because you eventually say, "I do."
So, if the performance never fully switches off, if some version of the edit is always running, you might assume the fix is simple. Just give it more time. Live together longer. Wait for the edited version to wear off on its own. But here's the problem. Even living together only shows you a fraction of the conditions a person actually exists in. You've likely seen them happy, relaxed, maybe even seen them on a bad day, tired after work, irritable, short-tempered. That feels like enough. It feels like you've seen the real them. But a bad day isn't the same as a bad year. You haven't necessarily seen them under real financial strain. Watched how they behave when someone they love is sick for months, not days. Watched what happens to their patience, their honesty, their character, not under pressure, but under prolonged pressure, the kind that doesn't resolve in a weekend. Most relationships, even long ones, quietly select for low-stakes conditions. You build a life together during a specific window, often a comfortable one, and mistake that window for the whole picture. Which means the version of them you know may be completely real and still be incomplete in ways that only reveal themselves when circumstances finally ask something harder of them than circumstances have asked so far. And you won't know which version you married until life decides to test it. So maybe you're thinking, fine, I haven't seen every version yet, but surely, if it ever comes down to it, they could just tell me, warn me, explain how they'd handle it before it happens. Here's the problem with that. They don't know either. Most people have never actually asked themselves the hard questions. Not, what do I want? But what do I become when I'm cornered, ashamed, out of options? Not from avoidance, just because nobody ever taught us to have that conversation with ourselves or why it matters. But say they did ask. Say they're the rare person who's genuinely reflective, self-aware, honest with themselves. Even then, the blind spot doesn't close. Because self-knowledge built through reflection is still just a theory about yourself. It hasn't been tested. Ask someone how they'd react to betrayal or loss or real failure, and even the most self-aware person will answer honestly and still be wrong. Not because they're lying to you, because they're guessing, using a version of themselves that's never actually been tested. Psychologists call this a failure of affective forecasting. We're consistently bad at predicting how we'll think, feel, or act in emotional states we haven't been in. Which means even total, radical honesty from the person you're marrying still leaves you short. You can ask every question. They can answer every one truthfully. And the answers can still be wrong, not from deception, because neither of you has the information yet. You're not just missing a version of them you haven't seen. You're relying on a version of them that doesn't fully exist yet, either.
So the information doesn't exist yet, not because it's hidden, but because it hasn't happened yet, which raises the obvious question. Fine, so give it time. Eventually, it will happen. And it will, just not on the timeline you're imagining. Think about what you're actually basing this decision on. A few years of dating, maybe a few more of engagement or living together. Call it 5 years, generously. Now compare that to what you're signing up for. 30 years, 40, 50, if things go the way you hope. 5 years isn't a preview of 50. It's a sample so small it barely qualifies as one. You wouldn't trust a 5-minute conversation to predict someone's entire personality, but somehow 5 years feels like enough to predict an entire life. This is what statisticians would call sampling error, mistaking a small early slice of data for the full pattern. Except here, the data is a person and the error is a marriage. The version of them you've gathered evidence on isn't wrong, it's just early, absurdly early compared to what you're about to build on top of it. Statistically, you're working off an incomplete sample. Psychologically, you're relying on a self-knowledge that hasn't been tested. Emotionally, you've mistaken comfort for certainty, which means by every measure, you're not marrying who you think you're marrying. You're marrying a stranger. It would be easy right now to feel a little unsettled about the person you're with, to start replaying moments, looking for the cracks, wondering what you missed. But that's not actually the discomfort worth sitting with, because this was never about them hiding something from you. Nobody lied, nobody manipulated, nobody withheld some secret self on purpose. Everything you've just heard applies to them exactly as much as it applies to you. You are also a performance they haven't fully seen past. You are also untested by conditions that haven't happened yet. You are carrying a version of yourself you've never had to meet because life hasn't asked the right question yet. So if there's someone to feel unsettled about, it's not just them. It's the version of you that's about to promise a lifetime to someone while still being, in some real way, a stranger to yourself. So ask yourself honestly, not about them, about you. If the hardest year of your life happened tomorrow, are you sure you know who you'd become? You may think you've already lived it, survived your worst year, your worst version, your worst self. Never underestimate life. It's not finished with either of you yet.
So what do you do with that? Not much, honestly. Not in the way you'd want. There's no test you can run, no number of years that guarantees you'll finally know someone completely. That was never actually on the table. It just felt like it was. What changes is smaller than that, and harder. You stop expecting certainty, and you start building for a person who's still partly unwritten, because they are, and so are you. You stop treating every unfamiliar reaction, every surprising fight, every version of them you haven't met yet as proof that something went wrong. It didn't. It's just proof that they're human, and so are you, and neither of you was ever finished. The closest thing to an answer isn't knowing everything in advance. It's staying willing to do the work as each version shows up. Auditing yourself honestly when you're tired or afraid or hard to be around, instead of waiting for life to hand you the answer after the damage is done. Not so you finally arrive at some finished self you can hand over completely. just so you keep meeting yourself first before you ask someone else to. Maybe that's not the answer you wanted, but it might be the only honest one. That you're not signing up to know someone completely. You're signing up to keep meeting them again and again for the rest of your life, sometimes for the first time. And maybe, just maybe, that's not something to fear. Maybe that's the part worth enjoying, the not knowing, the surprises, the slow work of meeting someone over and over. Because in the end, enjoy the simple things in life, because it's the simple things, like meeting someone new inside someone familiar, that make life amazing. Peace.